And on deck would be Pete Reed. And after that, George Meyer, Wildlife Federation. Good afternoon.
There. Thank you for sticking this out, and thank you for the opportunity to testify before you on these bills. I'm going to make a big effort not to repeat the many points that have already been made before. You have my written testimony, and as often I do late in the day, I'm going to riff a little bit as opposed to reading. I think there's a lot of take-homes from today. I guess I should start by introducing my organization. For those of you that don't know us, we haven't appeared before some of you before. We're a statewide nonprofit, nonpartisan wetland conservation organization. We were founded in 1969, and we've been working to promote the protection, restoration, and enjoyment of Wisconsin's wetlands ever since. We have long held that we support streamlining of wetland regulations, provided they can be done in ways that doesn't erode protections for valuable wetland resources. And on that note, we have a significant interest in this bill. I would like to say, though we're perceived as an environmental organization, regulations are actually a very small portion of our portfolio. Our broader programs focus on helping communities restore wetlands to solve problems like water quality management, groundwater health, and flooding. We do appear before you today in opposition to this proposal. We feel that eliminating protections for 1 million acres of wetlands unilaterally would accelerate wetland loss across the state and cause irreparable harm to Wisconsin's waters, wildlife, and downstream communities. That said, we agree with a great deal of what was shared today in terms of the problems that need to be addressed. We were a party to the development of the memo that Ducks Unlimited submitted to this committee, and others have already talked about the 4 points that have been recommended as part of that memo. But I do want to address just a few things to highlight where, again, I think there is a great deal of agreement in terms of problems that need to be solved. You've heard a lot about artificial wetlands and the need to be able to manage and operate stormwater ponds without, and other existing water management structures like and infrastructure like ditches without undue regulatory burden. We agree. You've heard a lot about inadvertent regulatory burdens related to incidental wetlands or areas on the land that become wet as a result of grading activities, or migration of wetland boundaries over time once planning has begun and or development or construction has started. There is clearly a need to set some baselines in policy and how our wetland regulatory programs are implemented so that developers aren't faced with the risk and undue burden of shifting sands under their feet as they're trying to move their projects forward. And I think there are very easy ways to get there. Tom Larson, in his testimony, raised a specific point about needing to look at situations where there was no delineation. We agree, and I think that we can work that out. So. There's more common ground, I think, than folks might have originally believed. Where I think we're having a little bit of a more difficult time is on some of the philosophical issues related to what is the role of regulation. So, for example, there are some who are advocating for this proposal that would that perceive regulations as onerous and unnecessary, whereas those of us that appear before you in support of the resource see regulations as an important conservation planning tool. That said, we have as great an interest in everyone in making sure that those regulations are working efficiently and are eager, not just willing, but eager to find ways to reduce the time it takes to comply with regulations, the cost, the burden. And again, I heard a lot of good ideas discussed today, and we have a lot of ideas as well, even things that aren't yet before you as part of that memo. One thing I'll mention is that we've learned a lot in the last 8 weeks. We've met with the authors to try to understand the problems they're trying to solve. We have met with the realtors and Wisconsin manufacturers and the builders, or I should say Paul Kent representing the realtors. We've also interviewed about 10, maybe 12 professional wetland consultants. And these discussions have informed our understanding of the problem and really opened our eyes to what we're dealing with here and why we're here, and also presented a lot of ideas for how to address them. I think there's a couple of things that haven't really come up much yet today that I want to put before you as suggestions. One is that, try as we might, the legislators, the regulated businesses, the conservation community, all of us have what I would describe as a solid but incomplete understanding of these issues. And there is a community of people that are really rock solid on sort of what's going on with our regulations and our resources and what do we do about it. And that's the wetland professional community, the consultants. I was very pleased to see several wetland consultants appear before you today. I thought the testimony provided by the gentleman from Mach 4 was excellent. And there were several others, but these are folks that a lot of the wetland consultants, I should say, are members of our organization. They come to our science conference for professional development and networking, and we've known them for years, and we rely on them to help us understand wetland permit concerns. But we share them. We share them with the business community because the business community are their clients, and so they're uniquely qualified, I should say, to navigate these issues and to provide an objective assessment of the problems and the solutions that we can employ to fix them. And I would just like to encourage the committee and the authors of the bill to engage that community more actively as we move forward and get into the details of what any eventual amendments look like, because I think they have a lot to bring to the table in this discussion. The other, I guess, the other couple of things I quickly would like to point out is that in addition to the issues I've already talked about, I think there's another couple areas where we all agree. One is that the 2012 wetland regulatory reforms that were enacted appear to not yet be working as intended. And that concerns us greatly. We think the framework is there to provide the kinds of common sense solutions and flexibility and innovation that you heard some of the development community asking for. These are things I think that the wetland professional community and we would also like to see. Paul Kent spoke on flexibility. I don't know why yet it's not working. I think we're getting a better sense of that through our conversations with folks. I'm disappointed to see, I don't think anyone from DNR is left in the room here, and I think that there was a lot of good information shared that they could take back to inform their program management and their actions moving forward. So I'd just like to say that there's so many good ideas. I agree with the many comments people made that we should be getting together and talking through these things in more detail. I will close by saying, exempting all isolated wetlands from state permit requirements would cause a great deal of harm, and I don't think it'll resolve many of the common problems that we heard about today. I also agree with the statements that several folks made that if we don't get this right this time, we are going to be back again next session, and the next session, and the next session. The best idea on the table that I've seen that hasn't been talked about today is the idea of convening some kind of a forum via a legislatively enabled study group or some other mechanism to get to the bottom of some of these issues and have a more systematic way of understanding them and addressing them as they emerge. If I have one major regret of my organization, it's that we didn't have the capacity to sort of monitor and oversee and understand how the implementation of the 2012 regulatory reforms were being enacted, because I think if we had been doing more of that, if the DNR had been doing more of that, if the legislature had been doing more of that, I don't think we would be at this point now where the kettle's boiling over and we have a short timeline and a strong mandate to get something done on the quick. So I share that as a call and a request for a need for more dialogue. I think we can get some things done this session, but I think there's a lot of issues left to address, some of which aren't even legislative in nature. We're committed to being part of that process, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions for Ms. O'Brien? Representative?
Yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. You mentioned that during this process over the last several weeks, you've had the opportunity to meet with the authors and share some of your thoughts and perspectives on it. Do you anticipate post this public hearing, which again is to offer more feedback and perspective on the bill, do you anticipate providing some authors with some opportunities or ideas for amendments and kind of a list of what those specifics may be?
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that. There is an active dialogue going on between the authors and some of the regulated groups and some of the conservation groups, and we're supporting those conversations as able and are available at the authors' requests to support that effort. Yeah.
Okay, other questions? Thank you very much, Ms.
Thank you.
O'Brien. Pete Reed, Mount